Astrology Livestream. His name is Nick Dagan Best. My name is Patrick Watson. He's an awesome Leo. I'm a loser Libra. I'm just kidding. Now I've annoyed every week. I have to annoy someone. Now I've insulted all Libras everywhere.
I'm surprised you didn't do like a St. Patrick's Day joke.
Oh goodness, yeah, that's kind of that would have been the obvious go-to,
right? That's what I figured.
Yeah, well,
I've been pinched enough times to traumatically wear green.
Oh yes.
It even says Ireland on my shirt.
Well done.
Which I imagine people would be like, "Wait a second, aren't you from England?" And yeah, the answer is yeah. I kind of recognize the long bad history of my ancestors, but my ancestors come from all over the place. I have Scottish, Irish, and English ancestry, and so I don't I'm not really celebrating the holiday in a particularly religious way or something, but
no, it's
given that I have the name, I just I go ahead and wear green. Anyway,
fair enough. I'm not wearing green. I should have thought of it. I didn't have my mind on it. It's not something I typically observe very much. I drink green beer 52 weeks a year. So like, why is today special?
Right.
So how you doing? How you been?
Well, I never quite know. It's funny. I'm like prepared to discuss like what we want to discuss, and I'm always thrown off by like a very simple question. Without getting into it, as we're very busy on some of our extracurricular projects, let's say, and so that's kind of taking up a lot of my time. I'm still trying to, keeping up with my schedule with clients, and just trying to stay on top of everything. And so that's sort of more or less still what's happening. There might be some major things I'm forgetting, but
well, I'm thinking of one major thing that maybe I can't remember if we've ever discussed it on the live stream, is your involvement with ESAR. And
sorry, what was that? There was it froze briefly.
Yeah. Okay.
What did you say?
It looked like you froze briefly.
Oh,
I said one thing I'm not.
Uh-oh. Oh no. It's still freezing up there. In any case, I think if anyone can still see me right now, I think he was asking about my involvement with ISAR, or some people call it ESAR. I'm actually part of CAPASAR, which is the certification branch of ISAR. So I currently serve as the president of the of CAPASAR, and so there's a lot of interesting things we're sort of working on, mainly working on getting the certification program back online while we fix things. So that's, I'm not really at liberty to discuss everything that I'm doing regarding that, but yeah, I'm not sure why he brought that up. In any case, so I think Nick has left, so it's just me. Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I should wait for him to come back before going into what we were going to be talking about today. Basically, we were going to be looking at Venus-Saturn conjunctions, since there's a Venus-Saturn conjunction happening in Pisces. Okay, I guess I should respond to the comments here. Laura from YouTube is asking, what does ISAR do specifically? So ISAR is the International Society for Astrological Research, and they're basically the only international astrological organization. They're mainly involved in education. They do Star Club presentations. Oh, it looks like Nick is back.
Yep. I had to
Okay,
switch
I was
rooms,
just
Wi-Fi accounts. Yeah,
okay. Sorry
I
about that.
no, no, um, I've got backup upon backup upon backup here, but yeah, if something goes wrong, you have to be ready for it here. Okay, I had to switch rooms and switch Wi-Fi accounts. The other Wi-Fi usually works. It just suddenly decided not to. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah, I can.
Okay.
So
Well,
I
then you're
think the
quiet, then I'm like,
last
"Oh,
thing
no,
you
it's
last thing you were asking about was Capasar, my
Mhm.
involvement in it. I was just explaining to the audience that, yeah, currently serving out the remainder of the last president's term for Capasar, which is the certification branch of ISAR. And so what we deal with is managing and administering the certification exam for receiving your Capasar certification. So that involves um, the exam for ethics awareness. So there's like an ethics training exam, and then there's also a consulting skills training component, and then a competency exam, which is about subject matter knowledge and interpretation. And so currently, all of those are offline while we are still fixing some things because we're in a major period of restructuring. And so that's kind of what I'm involved with. Sort of all administrative, kind of very thrilling things. But yes, that's all. I can really say about that. But if I have any amazing updates, I'll let you know. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I'm
um,
not sure we've ever mentioned that here, and I know you put a lot of time into that.
well, I some weeks less,
Sure, okay.
some weeks more. Usually, the last Mercury retrograde was a major period where a lot of really important fundamental things got done. Um, and yeah, it did require more of my time. Um, but it is a volunteer position essentially, and so I have to balance the time with my other responsibilities and duties, and the sort of dealing with the constant pressure of making sure that I'm doing the things that put the food on the table as well. So
Yeah,
anyway, that's all I'm really willing to say about it. But
okay.
um,
Fair enough. Shall we
um,
move on to today's topic?
yes, yes, please. Sorry, my least favorite topic is myself. So that's all.
That's my
Um,
favorite topic is you.
um,
All
so
things all things
yeah,
Patrick
Venus
loves.
Saturn conjunctions. Um,
Yeah, it's coming up. It's coming up this week,
so
and,
I have to admit that the combination of Venus and Saturn is one of the trickier combinations for me to internalize. Like I feel like I understand Venus just by itself. I feel like I really understand Venus Mercury, Venus Mars, Venus Jupiter, Venus Uranus, Venus Neptune, Venus Pluto, um Venus Sun, but Venus Saturn is one that can sometimes be trickier for me to just get. I really have to kind of remind myself of what those planets are about to understand the combination. And when we think about it, they're really different planets on a very fundamental level because uh, Venus is a nocturnal benefic, whereas Saturn is a diurnal malefic. So they're as different as they can be in the same way that Mars Jupiter conjunctions, Mars Jupiter is a pair of also very different in a similar way, a nocturnal malefic and a diurnal benefic. So, but I still feel like I understand Mars Jupiter better than I do Venus Saturn. But I do have a way of thinking about them that I think is illustrative of not only their meaning but also sort of how and what kind of situations where they might show up. So I'm kind of interested to see some of your examples, and I can show some of my examples. And but first of all, what do you think in general about like kind of the the fundamental or archetypal sort of meaning of Venus-Saturn conjunctions and interactions generally?
Yeah, having looked at a bunch of examples, it can vary. Like certainly when you find them in Libra, there's this kind of nice little sort of perfect meeting. The reason Venus rules Libra and Saturn is exalted in Libra is the Venusian sign of appearances and aesthetics, whereas as opposed to Taurus being the Venusian sign of that which is tactile and the sensations. And so with Venus and Saturn in Libra in particular, you get sort of a nice combination when they make a conjunction there. But then in the other signs, of course, it can vary. In many instances I've seen, you get kind of a Venus retrograde-ish type of situation where there's something sort of bittersweet or controversial or dishonest maybe, with regard to events that occur during the transit. And it can also just be like tough love, I think, is a great Venus-Saturn combination. Love that isn't warm and affectionate, but conditional or hard edge, something that has a sort of bitter taste to the usual sweetness of Venusian love, shall we say? One of the
That's interesting. When I think of some of the like more traditional delineations of Venus Saturn in combination, like if we look at, for example, Valens, he says Saturn and Venus. This is the 2nd century Hellenistic astrologer Vettius Valens, who in the Anthology says Saturn and Venus act harmoniously with respect to activities and employment. They promote success with respect to entanglements and marriage, agreeing and beneficial only for a time, but not to the end. Indeed, they cause abuse, divorces, inconstancy, and death, often entangling men with the base-born and the lowly, and causing them to fall into harm and lawsuits. Furthermore, when you look at the section in the Anthology where he talks about, he does various delineations of Venus in various aspects to other planets, all of the Venus-Saturn aspects, especially the hard aspects, the conjunction or opposition or square, he tends to connect with less positive types of, or subjectively negative types of scenarios involving marriage. So, for example, he might say, in fact, I have a whole article on this, on the things that he said about Venus aspects and one's love life. But so he sometimes connects Venus Saturn aspects to like being married to someone who is a much older person than yourself, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But sort of combining Venus and Saturn together. We know Saturn is that planet associated with the passage of time or old age or generational differences. Sometimes Venus Saturn is interpreted in terms of the borders which are crossed in terms of maybe socioeconomic position. So in fact, he even includes that in his delineation there, like this terrible language of entangling people with someone of a lower social position or something, which isn't inherently bad, right? That's not, to me, that's no big deal. You fall in love with someone who is in a lower socioeconomic position to yourself, who cares, But there can be sometimes difficulties associated with that, where Venus has to be sort of ultra understanding of the differentials, in the social location of the two people involved in that partnership. So there's some interesting. I just noticed some interesting kind of links there to what you're saying and what Vettius Valens is saying about Venus Saturn.
Okay. No, that's that. Thank you for that. That adds very nicely, I think, to some of the examples I have planned to discuss today. I don't know about you. We haven't sort of shared our examples with each other. I wonder if we're going to come up with
mine are very different from yours. I can almost guarantee.
I'm just I have a chair coming in here because I have no chair in this room.
Oh, He's got a chair, a
I've been on
throne.
my knees.
Oh no.
My wife very kindly brought me a chair so I can go through the next 2 hours not being on my knees, which
Yeah,
was that would have been an interesting way to do a Venus Saturn conjunction. But with the hardwood floor, it was starting to
yeah.
hurt. All right, now that I'm comfortably set up, and
My examples are more political, but I
okay,
think but very illustrative, I think, of of a particular side of the Venus Saturn complex that I think will be important actually for understanding next year as well. Because
yeah,
you want to explain
we
why? Do you want to explain why this particular one is important for next year as well?
Well, we covered this. I think we know one of the people we're gonna wind up talking about yet again
Yeah, yeah.
because someone has one of the people that So I think we knew this was coming up.
Mhm.
Donald Trump has a Venus Saturn conjunction in his chart, and the presidential inauguration next year, January 20th next year, there will be a Venus Saturn conjunction. And that was during our when we were doing our annual forecast back at I think we did it on December 31st. And you and I had the whole conversation about the fact that I've been saying over and over that he's going to win the election, and you had reservations. And then we looked at his chart on election night,
I
and
mean,
then
I still go back and forth, but you're almost missing the next part, though, right? It's not just that Venus is conjunct Saturn on election day; it's also that Venus goes retrograde and then conjoins Saturn again, and then
yes,
hits it again when it goes direct. So it's like
that's
that's a less common scenario, right? Where Venus
yeah.
retrogrades conjunct Saturn.
Yeah, that's something that did happen. For instance, in 1969, what's her name? Guilfoyle, his daughter-in-law, who's the head
Yes.
of the DNC. She was born in March of 1969, where there was this extended Venus-Saturn conjunction because Venus went
Mhm.
retrograde, and there's a couple of others that I've seen that happen. Like once in a while, a Venus retrograde will coincide with its co-presence with Saturn, and so you'll get this sort of drawn-out Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Right, and so that's
Uh,
kind of what we're looking at in early
yes,
2025,
yeah,
amidst so many other things. That really is one of the most densely packed periods in
oh
the
yeah,
coming time.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I have a few examples. I mean, we'll come back to Trump later. I didn't want to
Yeah,
start with him, but spoiler alert, we will be talking about him again. Much as I promise you, we try not to. We
right.
really do, but there's no way. He's got a Venus Saturn. He's not the only president with a Venus Saturn, but I thought I wanted to start off actually, especially given what you just outlined with that quote from Valens. I have a perfect example that I want to start with,
Okay.
and it's not political. Here we go. Here it is. Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain, the singer of Nirvana, had a Venus Saturn conjunction in Libra.
You mean
Um,
Pisces?
Sorry, in Pisces. Did I say Libra?
Yes.
Um, Excuse me. Yeah, no, because I was talking about Libra earlier. Okay, I
Yeah,
do know
yeah. No
I do
worries.
know the difference, folks. Okay, that's a brain fart right there. Here, let me just put
No,
his.
no. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to embarrass you. Go ahead.
No, no, no. I embarrassed myself. You
Oh,
corrected me. You didn't embarrass me. Okay, so there's his chart. Yeah, one of the interesting things about him is, if you follow his progress chart, just as a minor diversion, if you look at the month that Nevermind came out and he became a huge rock star, his progressed sun had progressed to his natal Venus, and then
mm,
by the time he took his life, his progressed sun had moved to Saturn. Now, it doesn't mean everyone whose progressed sun makes a conjunction to their natal Saturn means that they're going to self-delete, as we say in the new jargon. But it really is striking in his chart the way he went from this like these great heights of rock stardom to to something really, really tragic and Saturnian. Saturn, of course, isn't only things of that nature, but that is one of the things that strikes me about his Venus-Saturn conjunction. But something else about his chart that's interesting is he first met his future wife, Kurt Cobain. No, he didn't. His future wife's name was not Kurt Cobain. Her name is Courtney Love, and they first met at a club in Portland in February of 1990 during a Venus-Saturn conjunction. And then 2 years later, they were married during a Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Wow.
And then not too long before the last tour that Nirvana played in Europe occurred over the course of February of 94. Here, I'll get a little closer here. Just over the course, like as he was really coming apart, there was a Venus-Saturn conjunction, just like during the last days of Nirvana's last tour.
Saturn on the sun too.
Yeah, exactly. That was a big part of how this all went down as well. I think was transiting Saturn was on his sun, and of course his progressed sun was on his Saturn, and he just he didn't see any way out. Apparently, something went terribly wrong, and I'm not one of these people who believes that Courtney Love is, responsible for his death. In fact, even the other members of Nirvana who are not fans of Courtney Love, even they say that she probably extended his life as opposed to, contributed to ending it. That if anything, she kept him going when he was, already kind of a hopeless case. So either way, there is something. I remember when he died and she gave his eulogy, she said a whole thing, she had a whole thing in her eulogy for him about how tough love doesn't work. Tough love was this phrase that was bandied about, maybe you millennials have never heard it, but for Gen Xers, when we were kids, tough love was this sort of parenting philosophy to try and get these wayward Gen X kids in line, I think. Before Kurt died, there was an intervention done to try and get him on the straight and narrow, so to speak. And in hindsight, I think people felt that if anything, that sent him further over the edge as opposed to helping him with his drug abuse problems. There's something that phrase tough love, I think, is one of the things you see with Venus Saturn. I think Venus bonifies the Saturn, but Saturn really sours the Venus, is the best way to put it. So if you're a Saturnian type, the Venus Saturn conjunction can really introduce something pleasant or beneficial to a generally sort of Saturn demeanor. But if you're a Venusian type, then Saturn's a buzz killer. Saturn is not sweet, light, romantic love. It's love with duty, responsibility, and conditional. Saturn's very, very conditional. You have to meet a standard in order to appease Saturn, and I think that's a big part of what we see in his story.
Right. I think it's also interesting just in terms of, if Venus, I know you look at the way music is represented in astrology in a more sort of comprehensive or holistic way, like, it's not just the domain of one planet. It still stands out, though, as quite interesting that Venus, if we take it to be the main planet associated with like aesthetics or artistic or creative expression, that not only does he have it at close to its exaltation degree in its exalted sign, but also as part of this grand trine configuration with Jupiter and Neptune, and this configuration with Saturn. Because if we think of not only his impact on music, but also the particular style of music that he kind of ushered in, the grunge era,
Right.
and when the underground went mainstream with that Uranus Neptune conjunction in Capricorn, this is a this is not happy music. um, this is his particular, genius, was in his expression of like this melancholic music, this more Saturn
Yeah,
type.
I mean, his singing voice isn't for everyone. I personally love his singing voice, but
It's
I think
perfect for his music.
it's perfect for his. I mean, he really could convey the pain. That like it wasn't just sort of screaming. There really was something truly emotive about the way he could express himself vocally. I think he had just a really special singing voice. But you're absolutely the thing. I mean, it's true. Like Nirvana's music, like thematically, tended to be, uh,
Gloomy.
dark and not, not
Yeah.
not terribly bubbly. It had a tremendous edge to it. But I also, Nirvana as a group also had the one thing that is very Saturnian is Nirvana had tremendous humor to them as a
Mm.
sort of as a unit. Maybe a bit more sort of. There isn't a lot of humor necessarily in the songs, but in terms of how they uh, presented themselves, publicly, especially when they got famous and the way they sent it up. There's that great performance. They were not long after they hit it big, so to speak, in I think around November of '91, in the full midst of Nirvana mania. They made an appearance on a British TV show where they were expected to mime, to "Smells Like Teen Spirit." It was going to be live vocal, but the musicians had to mime, and they just sort of clown around. They're not taking the miming seriously. And Kurt Cobain sang "Smells Like Teen Spirit." In a low sort of Morrissey-esque voice, rather than he didn't sing it the way he usually sings it, and it's hilarious
Right.
because I mean they're in England and
I gotta
yeah,
say, it's almost Beatle-like cheekiness.
yes, well, yeah, I mean a few steps above. I mean the Beatles, when the Beatles were performing music, they would take it very seriously. It's true, like
Right.
I mean, but you're right. Like I mean, the Beatles had a sort of clownish, very funny uh, um, identity. The
Mhm.
four of them as a group, they could be hilarious. I mean, if they had no musical talent, the four of them could have been like a kind of Marx Brothers type of outfit.
Right.
And Nirvana had that too in their own way. Nirvana were very funny, and that is a Saturnian thing. Humor is Saturn,
Right.
as they say. Comedy is tragedy plus timing, right?
Right.
And
It something else that kind of occurs to me, especially given that he's represented by Mercury and that Venus is also in that opposition to Uranus, he before it was even like so-called like acceptable or cool, he was obviously extremely pro LGBTQ,
oh God, yeah,
pro, he was a feminist, he even performed sometimes like in a dress. He
well,
was
he
someone who
did, yeah,
completely flouted,
yeah.
these sort of gender norms in some ways too.
It's really important. Like today, we sort of take it for granted that this is, um, it's a cultural thing. Lots of young people are demonstrably pro LGBTQ, but in the early '90s, male rock stars, or the hip hop stars for that matter, were expected to toe the masculine line. It
Right.
was supposed to be this very macho thing, and it really, what you were not supposed to cross that line. There was a TV show on MTV called Headbangers Ball, right? And it was the heavy metal, hour on MTV. And yeah, Kurt Cobain showed up in a ball gown. He's like, well, it's a ball.
I
um,
mean, it's at once hilarious, but also appreciably,
Provocative.
groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Provide, subversive. In that context. So I think that's a perfect addition to that, and a greater, a great testament, I think, to that kind of Venus Uranus opposition, as well as that conjunction with the Saturn. He really. That's a lot for one person to handle here. This is, that Venus is so um uh uniquely kind of tensely aspected by these like major outer planetary transits. It's really like the ordinary planet finds itself in an extraordinary situation.
Yeah.
um you know, Venus just shows up in the midst of these kind of shattering transits from the mid 60s.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great example of Kurt Cobain. I love how you're able to tie in the recurrence transits of Venus and Saturn as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
it does have a lot to do, with his marriage to Courtney Love. I think his relationship with her. Obviously, the Venus Saturn is in the seventh house.
right.
I mean, that's another little delineation. Venus Saturn in the seventh house is um,
How
people
does one
don't.
describe the
Well, people don't.
the
People
Cobain
don't.
love romance?
Yeah,
Um,
people don't like your wife. Courtney Love. I mean, I'm not a Courtney Love hater, but she had actually. It's funny. I know who I'm going to go to next. She had kind of a Yoko Ono esque uh, role in the zeitgeist, and again, I'm not a Yoko Ono hater, but in the same way that you have this really popular male rock star with a really, at the time, unpopular female wife, who tends to be sort of a scapegoat for whatever seems to be going wrong in the rock star's life.
well, doesn't
Uh,
he also have Saturn in seventh?
John Lennon,
John Lennon? Yeah.
probably, if he is Aries rising, he has Saturn in the seventh. Yeah, although he has Venus in the sixth, he doesn't have a Venus. He probably had a progressed Venus Saturn conjunction maybe around the time that he met
Oh
Yoko.
no, wait. I no. Oh wait, no. I'm wrong about that. No, he has Saturn in Taurus.
Oh
So
no,
he
yeah,
couldn't
yeah, yeah.
have.
What am I saying? He died when Saturn was in Libra. Thank you. You missed. Yeah,
Okay,
uh,
sorry. Yeah,
yeah.
I
He
missed.
died when Jupiter and Saturn were in the seventh house.
Right,
That's right. Of course, he
right.
has it in Taurus.
Actually, I do remember what it was that made me think. Oh, it's a malefic in the seventh. You see, the ruler of his seventh house. Sorry, the ruler of his first house is Mars in Libra, and so Mars ends up being in his seventh house, and I thought that was an interesting way that the Yoko Ono thing could be sort of understood, that like his experiences with partnerships would somehow be fraught, or cause just be coincident with like other tensions in his life. And
Well,
it wasn't, of course, she was not the cause of him deciding to quit the Beatles. She
no.
was more of a symptom of
Yeah,
his desire
yeah,
to
yeah.
grow and move on.
I mean, one thing I think I could say about John Lennon is that he obviously needed a partner. I
Mhm.
started this episode by playfully bad mouthing Libras, but John Lennon was a Libra,
Mhm.
um, and the songwriting relationship with Paul McCartney, the way it developed over the course of the Beatles, and where the longer the Beatles went on, the more I mean, John Lennon was writing great songs all through the Beatle years, but towards the end, he was writing great songs to try and keep up with McCartney as a sort of foil. McCartney was a lot more prolific, and Lennon tended to, excuse me, Lennon tended to cling to Yoko Ono as his next muse, as a partner,
Mm.
and that was very. I mean, uh, uh, I mean, it was obviously it was a great creative partnership, but you did get the sense that he might have needed her more than she needed him.
Sure.
Um,
So
creatively, excuse me.
who is your next example going to be?
Who's my next example going to be? Well, it's going to be Yoko Ono.
Oh, oh, really? Okay. I was like wondering, like, why are we talking I guess maybe I brought it up, but okay, this is quite interesting. All
Yes,
right.
Yoko Ono has a Venus-Saturn conjunction. And speaking, I showed you Kurt Cobain got married when he was having a Venus-Saturn recurrence. Well, she married John Lennon during this period in 1969 when there was a drawn-out Venus retrograde conjunct Saturn.
Wow. Okay. Very good.
Her- yeah. Yeah, now we're cooking with gas. So yeah, you can see, I mean, Jupiter Uranus was headed for her ascendant here. This Mars is about to go retrograde on her moon. This would Paul McCartney and Linda Eastman had just been married a week earlier. I think we've talked about this before when we've discussed the Beatles on
Mhm.
our live stream. Is that they're always trying to sort of
Have what each other has.
have what the other guy has. Yeah. So it's not, this marriage was what I mean. I think they'd been together for nearly a year when this wedding happened. I think they'd been officially an item for about 10 months, and John had been married and he divorced his wife. But the song "The Ballad of John and Yoko" basically describes the circumstances of this marriage and how they did it in Gibraltar because it was technically British territory, and they wanted to do it really quickly, and so that's how it wound up happening. And then it was followed by their honeymoon was a series of bed-ins. First, the bed-in in Amsterdam, and then the bed-in in my hometown of Montreal. I'm one of the things I'm proudest of as a Montrealer is that John wrote "Give Peace a Chance" in Montreal and recorded it in Montreal during that bed-in. I think
Wow. Okay.
yeah. That's and to this day, when I was young, my friends and I snuck into the Queen Elizabeth Hotel and went to that room on the 17th floor. We couldn't get into the room, but we went to the hallway and looked at that front door. Somehow, we managed to weasel our way in. I went to school not too far from there. But yeah, here you are. Just like Kurt Cobain married Courtney Love during a Venus-Saturn recurrence transit, Yoko Ono married John Lennon. And, if you look at this marriage and this Venus-Saturn conjunction transit is happening in Yoko's seventh house. If you look at this from Yoko Ono's perspective, look, marrying this guy, okay, on the plus side, yes, he's very wealthy, and that does make life easier, but money isn't everything. And boy, has this woman paid for marrying the guy she did, right? I mean, just
Well, I
becoming
guess
this.
both Courtney Love and Yoko Ono, they both married men who, well, would pass before their time, in a
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
But also in a weird way, they would become defined in
Elias.
some ways
Yeah,
by those connections as well. Yoko Ono, despite all of her own artistic and creative endeavors, will never quite be able to escape just having been John Lennon's wife. And
yeah,
I think, and I think, unfortunately, some similar thing could be said for Courtney Love as well. That she, despite her own, accomplishments and achievements, that she may still be remembered as like Kurt Cobain's wife.
yeah,
So it's just interesting that they would have both kind of had these same sort of Venus-Saturn signatures, both in their charts and at their marriages. Really, really interesting.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, largely, I mean, the Lennon Ono marriage. I mean, there was a period when they separated. The famous lost weekend that John Lennon had between 1973, 74.
Yeah, it's a weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, the lost weekend. He wasn't always the greatest husband. I mean, I admire John Lennon, for a lot of things, but he was.
Being a good husband, probably not one of them.
Yeah, no, he's a really flawed, insecure guy.
Right.
I mean, when I was young, I used to, yeah, I had that same sort of idealization of him, but I've read too much, and also now I'm older. I'm older than he was when he died, and I have been older than he was when he died for 15 years. So I can look at him in a very different way than I did, say, when I was, well, certainly when I was 6 or 7, but even when I was 18 or 20. I can look at him now as a talented but sort of messed up guy who had to, I mean, to his credit, he had a whole lot on his shoulders.
Sure.
I mean, imagine changing your hairstyle and the whole world changes their hairstyle because you did. For starters.
Is that a pun? Imagine. Oh, okay. Never
Oh,
mind.
geez. Well, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, listen, Imagine is a great song, but it's a song. inspired by Yoko Ono's, idea. I mean, she's the one who sort of expressed the idea, and then he wrote a song based on what she said.
Well, this is why I think he is an Aries rising, because it puts all that Libra stuff in the 7th house, and it was
Yeah.
Uranus transiting through Libra that coincided with not only with when they got married. Notice that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction at the time of the marriage would be in John Lennon's 7th house if he was Aries rising, which is pretty interesting. Not to mention, this is within 2 weeks of a lunar eclipse that would occur in his 7th house as well. He was obviously greatly moved and inspired by Yoko. So fantastic. Very interesting. Should I share one or
just a moment here.
Feel free.
There we are. So go ahead and share your screen and
already. Okay, so I took a slightly different tack on Venus-Saturn, and this actually kind of occurred to me somewhat recently, in the past couple of years. There was this show on FX, which I think you can still see on Hulu, and it's called Mrs. America, and it's about some of the behind-the-scenes drama of the 1972 Democratic National Convention and the fight to get the ERA passed, and Phyllis Schlafly's attempt to try to stop the ERA. So essentially, it's a really fascinating bit of history. Acting and performances in it are really, really good. But it suddenly sort of occurred to me that there's this phrase which we hear a lot about in terms of like gender disparities. There's this term, the glass ceiling, which refers to this kind of invisible barrier that people can't get past because of their sex, because of their gender identity. And it's typically applied to the context of feminism and women who despite their ambitions or despite their qualifications, there are just certain barriers that you can't get past. And so I thought that was interesting, because we know that, not to be too gender essentialist, but that Venus has this connection not just to social issues surrounding sexuality and gender, but has this more traditional association with femininity itself and women's issues. So what's quite interesting is I looked at the chart of Shirley Chisholm, of one of the first, not only the first women to run for president, but also the first African American woman to run for president. And so we have her chart. We don't have her birth time, but we do have the day that she was born. So that was November 30th, 1924. So I can share my screen here.
Yeah, please do. And this was another period where during this campaign, what with Watergate and whatnot, this is another time when you had Venus retrograde co-present with Saturn.
So you can see, so Shirley Chisholm was born with a Venus-Saturn conjunction. And what I thought was interesting about this is because when you look at the 1972 Democratic National Convention, where there were a lot of things kind of happening all at once, and I may not have all of the history exactly correct here, but basically there was this women's group that was led by like Gloria Steinem. They were trying to get George McGovern, the Democratic candidate for president at the time, to include abortion rights, reproductive rights, as like part of the Democratic platform. And at the same time, and they were supporters of Shirley Chisholm, and I guess Hubert Humphrey tried to give Shirley Chisholm a boost by like releasing his delegates to her. And so it's the 1972 Democratic National Convention sort of stands out as sort of this time where these sort of concessions were kind of made, and this ultimately this kind of hard limit, in a sense, was sort of reached. And so it's interesting because if we look at the 1972 Democratic National Convention, we can see that was also at a Venus-Saturn conjunction when Shirley Chisholm's presidential aspirations sort of came to this kind of
Right.
terminating point. Now, what kind of connects this to some bigger themes surrounding this idea of the glass ceiling is if we look at the date that the 19th Amendment was ratified, that
I was
was
going to
at
put
a
this up. Yeah, I was
Venus-Saturn.
going to put this up too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was at a Venus-Saturn conjunction, which is interesting because a lot of other countries, have already had women as heads of state, but the United States has still really struggled with this. This is something that we just keep trying to kind of work towards and still can't quite get our heads around. Now, my next couple of examples are not necessarily Venus-Saturn conjunctions, but they are Venus-Saturn hard aspects, which I think is further illustrative of this idea of Venus-Saturn coinciding with times where like the glass ceiling is like reached.
Okay.
Which, yeah.
Can I add a couple of things
Yes,
to
please
what you're
do.
showing before you move on? Whoops, what have I done here?
I can stop sharing.
Yeah, no, I've taken yours down for a second.
Oh no. What?
Just for a second. Okay, no, hold on. That's the fun of the live stream, folks. It's live.
All right.
No, because you mentioned Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem has a Venus-Saturn conjunction as well.
That's right. Yes,
So,
I forgot to mention.
so her whole involvement in that story with Shirley Chisholm and the
George
campaign,
McGovern.
and George McGovern, all that sort of played out. And just like to like while we're on that theme, because you put that up, Susan B. Anthony also had a Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Very
Since
good.
we're on the subject of women voting, and obviously that was a big part of Susan B. Anthony's campaign. So yeah, there's obviously something to that.
Right.
Figures like Gertrude Stein, another important feminist figure, also had Venus-Saturn conjunction. So yeah, there's that whole there's something really rich in that whole history.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. Yeah.
Going from Susan B. Anthony to the 19th Amendment to Steinem and Chisholm at the DNC in '72. There is some kind of Venus-Saturn conjunction thread running through all those things.
So
go ahead and share your screen again.
Okay.
I just wanted to insert that stuff in there before we sort of moved on. Yeah.
No, that's perfect. That fits exactly with what I'm talking about. So Chisholm, she has this quote, which I just thought captured this Venus-Saturn conjunction. After she sort of lost at the 1972 DNC, like where she still didn't have enough delegates to make a difference. She said something to the effect of like, in spite of hopeless odds, like in terms of explaining why she ran for office. She said, in spite of hopeless odds, to demonstrate the sheer will and refusal to accept the status quo. And I think there's something about that, like Saturn, like Venus-Saturn is almost like doing the right thing, even if it's hopeless, like even, or loving someone, even if it, is gonna kill you, or even if it's, even if it's ill-fated. It's like there's a kind of tragedy, but also a sort of beauty in that complex that I just think sort of captures kind of Venus-Saturn essence. So Astro Brain Farts on YouTube just said the movie about Shirley Chisholm called Shirley is coming out on March 22nd, a day after the Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Wow.
Thank you so much for letting us know that, Astro Brain Farts.
Yeah, I have a biography of her, but I haven't read it yet. I'm looking forward to that. But
there's probably other Venus-Saturn themes then in her life that we haven't, uncovered. Obviously, this is a very this is a fairly shallow examination of this whole rich history here. But,
yeah, we could go into the weeds at some point. Yeah.
But so along the same lines of this idea of like periods of where like the glass ceiling is reached in a kind of dramatic way, we also have, for example, Hillary Clinton was born with Venus square all of these malefics. So she had Venus moving into this square with not only Mars and Pluto, but also Saturn. So she was born with a Venus-Saturn square. And of course, you may you may know she's had a few close calls with being able to like almost make it, seemingly having everything kind of going for her, but somehow just not being able to quite make it. So, for example, if we look at when Hillary Clinton launched her 2008 campaign, we can see that she did that at a Venus Saturn opposition.
Mm.
So that's clearly linking into this sort of Venus Saturn theme that was present at her birth. When she lost the 2008 primary to Obama and she officially dropped out on June 7th, 2008, there was still a lot of chatter that she might be able to do some kind of backroom plot to steal the nomination from Obama at the now, she in public, she was not in favor of these things, but these were things that other diehard Hillary supporters at the time were kind of saying. And so it's kind of interesting that in the lead up to the nomination, rather the Democratic National Convention in 2008, we have this announcement, which was made on August 14th, 2008, which where basically Obama and Clinton made this joint announcement saying that as a kind of show of unity and a show of kind of respect to the diehard Clinton supporters, that her name would be put on the ballot at the DNC, even though it's a symbolic gesture. They wanted to kind of honor that to some degree. And you'll see August 14th, 2008 is, of course, at Venus-Saturn conjunction in Virgo. The DNC itself, Venus is pretty far past Saturn, but they're both still in Virgo by the time of the DNC. And this is important because this is like, first, or, in that time, the most seemingly viable potential candidate for president just coming so close, but not quite being able to cross the finish line, reaching this glass ceiling once again. And then, of course, maybe even more excruciatingly, was the 2016 election, which, as you can see, also took place in the aftermath of a Venus-Saturn conjunction, which occurred shortly before the election. And that particular,
if I remember correctly, sorry to interject, the
yeah,
actual Venus-Saturn conjunction before the election, was that not the debate when like Trump brought in all those women who had accused Bill Clinton of assault and whatnot, like Paula Jones and all them? Weren't they in the front row? Am I confused? Because there were three debates, and I'm trying to I tend to get them mixed up at this point. But
yeah,
if
I
I
remember.
remember,
So I know that it happened in when like Mars was conjunct Pluto, I believe. So we can, I don't know which one it might have been, but we can see that basically from the time of the debate where he was like looming over her, that Mars Pluto one.
remember that he was following
Venus,
her
yeah,
around?
gosh, so creepy. Venus was conjunct Saturn during this whole time frame. Now, this is important because Trump was born with that Venus Saturn conjunction as well,
Yeah.
and it's I guess what makes it like uniquely awful that Hillary lost. Not just that Hillary lost, but lost to someone like Trump, right? Someone who is blatantly and openly misogynistic, a convicted rapist, credibly accused multiple ways of his transgressions against women, which I think is how his Venus Saturn conjunction in the 12th house kind of manifests. And so I think it was just an especially crushing sort of blow that she in many ways had all of the sort of qualifications that you would want a president to have, and actually did win the popular vote by 3 million votes, but because of the idiocy basically of the electoral college and this sort of point system that it implements, she ends up losing to this lousy misogynist. So it's another time of this sort of bitter Venus Saturn potential. Now, another kind of interesting way that this can be sort of contrasted is if we look at the chart of Kamala Harris, who you can see was not born at a Venus-Saturn opposition, but instead was born at a Venus-Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which is interesting because it would suggest someone who would be able to break past barriers rather than be contained by hard limits and ceilings. And of course, Kamala Harris, is the first woman vice president, and based on any number of scenarios, could still be acting president or president at some point in the near future. So it's interesting that she kind of has that sort of Venus-Uranus signature as opposed to this Venus-Saturn signature. And you've brought up before this amazing pattern with like Venus-Saturn and Venus-Uranus in the inauguration charts for Obama versus what's coming up. So I think there's that's another way we can kind of understand this Venus-Saturn cycle or conjunction, is that it sort of shows this potential for someone doing the right thing or something, but still kind of coming up against this idea of like limits in some respect. And so that's why when I see all those sort of examples and I see it sort of all put together like that, I think of Venus-Saturn and the glass ceiling in different contexts.
Indeed. So what do you have for us next?
Well, that was pretty much it.
That was it?
I don't have ones that are within that same theme. I mean, I have like just some really random ones like I'm not sharing anymore. Like for example, I have just like a couple of like recurrence transit ones. Like for example, Benedict Cumberbatch was born with Venus conjunct Saturn and Leo, and there was a Venus-Saturn conjunction when the first Doctor Strange movie premiered. So he I'm not sure what the meaning of that is. In his life, I wasn't able to really research in depth what that conjunction should mean in his life. But
wait a minute, Benedict Cumberbatch isn't in Doctor Strangelove. Oh, you mean Doctor Strange? I thought you said Doctor Strangelove. Never mind.
Yeah, Doctor Strange. Yeah.
Of course. I was like, wait a minute, he was too young to be in the Kubrick movie. What the hell is Watson talking about? But yes, he's Marvel Comics, Doctor Strange. Yes.
Right. I didn't go much deeper than that, but I thought that the kind of Venus-Saturn glass ceiling connection was kind of the one sort of more impressive thing I can, was sort of able to present. And you actually were able to add onto that really well by adding the context of Gloria Steinem's chart and Susan B. Anthony. So there's something really big there that we've only just like scratched the surface of. Someone who really understands this history more in depth would be able to really excavate that and do it.
No, there's definitely there's work to be done there. Maybe we make it a topic for a future episode. I'll share one here. Since we're talking about the American presidency, George Washington had a Venus-Saturn conjunction out of sign, but you can see very, very close, like within 3 degrees. And his second inauguration occurred again with a Venus-Saturn conjunction, but out of sign.
Weird.
Now, what I know about this is, he did not want to do a second term. He was reluctant enough. That this was not, he didn't need the ego boost that, Trump seems to need. And, he might have had a sense that he didn't have much time left in his life and everything he wanted to do, but, duty was being inaugurated a second time. And his second presidency, he sees sort of he sees a lot of things going wrong, and there isn't much he can do. I mean, I think he was able to sort of do more in the first term, and the second term is kind of bittersweet. And when he leaves, of course, when he leaves office 4 years later, he leaves with the message that that the country mustn't descend into having political parties and that the kind of fighting that is basically defines American politics today. So yeah, I think just that idea of responsibility, duty. I mean, these are very sort of Saturnian things. Everyone at this time thinks he's the only man for the job. And even though he doesn't want to take it, just everyone else absolutely insists he's
But that's also what made him, kind of, I guess, right
right.
for it.
Yeah, in his own way. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
as we mentioned when we did the Napoleon episode, when Napoleon was on his deathbed, he lamented that people wanted him to be George Washington, to sort of gracefully give up power and do a proper sort of transition of power. And
Well,
and he
wasn't that considered like a huge deal? Like it
yes,
was like a
no one had
massive
ever done
deal.
this. I mean, no one had ever done this, and this really has been the thing that, say what you will about all the flaws and tragedies in American politics. Um, the one thing that did happen, to the credit of the not just the founding fathers, but everyone involved in this first administration, is that there was a smooth transition of power. It would be all the more so important, than at the next election, when
Oh,
John
1800.
Adams and Thomas Jefferson fought a brutally ugly campaign.
Right.
And and really, the fact that there was a smooth transition of power at that point just sort of they did it because they had both been admirers of Washington, clearly, and neither would have wanted, he died not long before that election, so neither of them would have wanted to disgrace his memory by attempting a coup or what have
Or
you.
something
So
like that. Yeah. Who would do
right,
that? You'd have to
yeah,
be
I mean,
crazy to do that.
Adams had only just moved to Washington, D.C., so like there was barely a capital to storm.
Then
Uh,
why did Trump, do that? Like it's so interesting that like Venus-Saturn sort of shows up seemingly in this more like kind of maybe more noble way in George
yeah,
Washington's life, but then it shows up in this like really like debased way in
right.
Trump's chart. Um but I guess that is maybe those two sides of the coin. Venus is, well, I guess Saturn can have its good points too, but
Yeah, but
um
look, George Washington's got Saturn in Aries in the 12th. Trump's got Venus, Saturn in the 12th in Cancer.
right.
You almost so Saturn in Aries versus Saturn in Cancer. Somehow, yeah, Washington, does the right thing, and Trump did not. So yeah, that is a curious contrast. And I don't necessarily have an answer for it. Is it because Washington's Venus is exalted and at the critical degree of Pisces? Is that what makes the difference for him, or the fact that it's in the 11th rather than the 12th? I really don't know.
Well, Saturn in Aries generally, since Aries is like the exaltation of the sun, Aries is a sign that really kind of lifts up the idea of like more imperial or tyrannical figures, people who kind of lead, who don't necessarily ask for permission, who just kind of do
Right.
things, right? So Saturn being in that place is like, the one check, the one character in the solar system, who might, have a more critical viewpoint on, autocratic Aries type leaders. And so it's interesting because uh the amendments were ratified under Saturn and Aries, and all of those
Mm.
amendments are about checking, providing a limit to what the authorities can do. So it's interesting that he would have had his Saturn return in that time frame,
Yeah, you can see Saturn
And
is leaving Aries when yeah.
right. And the and so when Saturn's in Aries, there's kind of there's a sense of like limitations being put on these types of folks, which is another reason why I've said that like Saturn and Aries periods also seem to coincide with like periods of gun control or gun registration, because it's trying to sort of limit like martial things in the world, like weapons. Whereas Saturn in Cancer is like Cancer is the place of the moon and the exaltation of Jupiter. Cancer is a sign that like usually upholds these kind of more these values that sort of uphold or support life and the
Right.
proliferation of life and joys. So Saturn in Cancer is out of sign because it's like it's kind of cruel in that place. Saturn in Cancer is, well, it's like building skyscrapers, where there could otherwise be, um, nature and wildlife or what have you. It's the contamination of or it's like building a, well, as Joni Mitchell put, pave paradise and put up a parking lot.
Right.
That's what I think Saturn and Cancer is like. So I think in a way Saturn and Aries in the context of like a leader makes sense for someone like Washington, who was sort of more critical of centralized power, whereas uh Saturn in Cancer, maybe that has positive connotations in other areas, like being a real estate developer, but maybe not so much for a leader.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's broad brush strokes. Potentially as an explanation.
Yeah, no, that does make a certain amount of sense. Yeah, Trump is, and one of the recurrences, since we're on Trump here, I know one of the recurrences he had for a Venus-Saturn conjunction down here in Sagittarius. He gave a talk in Rock Hill, North Carolina. One of his shows, whatever whatever you call them, his rallies. In January of 2016, and I think this is the one where he mocked the disabled reporter, wasn't it?
Maybe I don't know which one. I don't know when exactly that was. When did Trump mock the disabled reporter? January
8th, 2016.
No, I think it might have been earlier in 2015, but I think he did this a few times though.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to
Well, this is one of them. One of his other recurrence transits. A negative one for him. Once in a while, he does have bad luck. There was a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Pisces when he was forced to sell the Plaza Hotel, because he had money problems. And that's, Venus-Saturn in the 8th, a very angular 8th, but the 8th house nonetheless. And not something he likes to talk about, is it?
Right. So I think the time he did mock the disabled reporter was actually at a Mercury-Saturn conjunction.
Oh, okay.
November 24th, 2015, which tracks, but it's not necessarily a Venus-Saturn conjunction,
Okay.
right?
Okay. I've forgotten why I had that January 8th chart up there. I know it's important in some regard, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, all of his rallies seem to be just trash, but
especially
but he's had particular ones that were like especially bad, like where he like encouraged the people to like beat someone up or something.
Yeah.
Just God, asshole. Anyway, so
we've moved on from the we've covered the Trump thing. We don't need to keep talking.
Well, I would think you'd want to mention the like 2008
Okay.
to 2025 thing. Sorry, the 2009 to 2025 thing, because I think that potentially that
Okay. Yeah.
provides some context
Sure. Why don't
to
I do that?
the importance of this Venus-Saturn conjunction in relation to the next one, because they're happening in the same signs. Like, really, the way I'm thinking about it is the 2025 Venus retrograde conjunctions to Saturn is like the really big extended one.
Mhm.
And this one should be, in a sense, like a kind of preview almost of what that Venus-Saturn conjunction in early 2025 is about. We might have, I know we've shown this before, but
Yeah, I guess it does
I
bear
think
repeating.
it makes
All right.
sense to show.
Okay. So yeah. So oh, just setting this up here. So yeah, this is Obama's inauguration in 2009, and there was a Venus-Uranus conjunction in Pisces, which happens. The Here, we'll just look at the inauguration chart on its own. Um, because inauguration is always at 12, or in this case, for some reason, I have 12:05. I think because it was late or whatever. Although technically, he's inaugurated at 12.
12 regardless. Yeah.
Right, but every second presidential inauguration since we've moved to January 20th, every second one always has Venus in Pisces here. You know, because it's every 4 years, and the Venus synodic
Right.
cycle is 8 years. But this particular one had Venus conjunct Uranus in Pisces. And that's
Which would have
important.
notions of being a breakthrough of some sort. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, bear with me here. Let me just put this up. So yeah, this is the inauguration in 2009, and if we jump ahead 16 years to Venus synodic returns, whoever's inaugurated on January 20th, 2025, it'll happen during a Venus-Saturn conjunction. And, you know, in the same place that mirrors the Venus-Uranus conjunction of Obama's inauguration.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. You know, as you know, it's transit. Here, I'll put him up on the by. What have I done wrong here? Oh, 2025. Sorry. So yeah, this Venus-Uranus is a recurrence of his natal Venus-Saturn. You've got the Mars retrograde going over that. I think this is him being inaugurated. You know, I've said this enough times.
Right.
I'm really tired of saying it.
Right.
Everyone else is even more tired of me saying it.
But what I think is important to note is that even if you didn't know the context, of like who was going to be nominated, in a sense, like you could have looked ahead, you know, prior to 2008, prior to Obama ever being known about, prior to anything, you would have been able to tell if it was going to have to happen in January 20th, 2009, that, you know, that one would stick out because Venus would be in Pisces like it is every other 8 years, but that particular one happened to be conjunct Uranus, which is a planet of like breakthroughs and because it was opposite Saturn, you know, with like dedicated opposition. So we would be able to say like there's something special or different about that one. And that would make a lot of sense, Obama being the first Black president. So you can see how kind of distressing this is, given that everything I've just talked about with like Venus-Saturn aspects showing like times where the glass ceiling is in sharp relief, that, you know, even the current vice president, the first woman to be vice president who has Venus conjunct Uranus as a natal signature, that the inauguration 2025 instead emphasizes Venus-Saturn, which is times of limitations or bad things generally for equality, or maybe more specifically for women.
Yeah,
And
it's a glass
so,
ceiling for autocratic dictators. Let's put it that way.
right. And it's
Yeah.
but it's also weird that this is it's almost the return of George Washington's natal Venus-Saturn signature, except that Saturn's in Pisces rather than having moved into Aries.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's worrying,
That's
because it's like it's like, it not only is it recurrence of like this misogynist asshole who's like beaten women before, but then it also ties into this longer history of like this sort of struggle, for equality, or struggle for um against the the glass ceiling. So it's I think I think all of that history is kind of bears down upon that date.
Yeah, I mean, it's the funny thing about Trump. Like, television. I know it doesn't mean as much to millennials. It was more of a baby boomer Generation X thing. I mean, by the time millennials were getting interested, I mean, there's some TV for you guys. I mean, TV in the sense of like network television, not the new, streaming service kind of phenomenon. But the television I grew up on, it had this whole, it went from I Love Lucy and to Star Trek, to whatever, Cheers and Seinfeld, and it's got this whole history, and it comes to this amazing crashing halt with the TV strike in 2007 allows this. Okay,
Yes, yeah, you're back, more or
okay.
less.
I don't know what we missed in there. I'm sorry about that. What I was saying is that the history of television, which it has this whole sort of rich history to it. Whatever, even if you don't like any of the shows, it's got this whole arc of history to it, and it ends with reality TV and the Celebrity Apprentice. Like, just like it ends in shit. It ends in junk, and and it's propelled by the TV writers strike in 2007, 2008. This is part of the reason that the show didn't have such great ratings, but because they didn't need a writer, suddenly Celebrity Apprentice becomes this big hit. It's almost like the same thing is happening to American politics. Like, it doesn't, like, this huge tradition of 200 plus years of transition of power, and everything that's been successful about the American political system, and it seems to come with a crashing halt with Trump, just like TV did.
So one of the things that is kind of interesting about that is that the TV writer strike, that was late 2007 into early 2008, which was Mars going retrograde from Cancer into Gemini. Now we're coming back around to
Yeah.
Mars going retrograde from Leo, going back into Cancer. So there's that Mars retrograde in Cancer that seems to connect these two time periods.
Yeah.
Late 2007 into early 2008 versus late 2024 into early 2025. Is that where
Right.
you're going with it?
Yeah, and we saw that Mars retrograde in Cancer is conjunct his Venus-Saturn conjunction when it comes to Inauguration Day.
Right.
So he's, anything that was really working in America, be it network TV or the American presidency, he just comes along and like, that's how it ends, seemingly anyway. Until it metamorphosizes into something else.
Right. So does that mean the Mars retrograde in 2027 occurs in Cancer?
No, in 2027, the Mars retrograde will be, just a moment, I'll put
Just
it up
Gemini?
here.
Or
No. It's going to move on. It always moves forward. We've already had the Mars retrograde in Gemini in
Oh,
2022.
well, yeah, that's right. Okay, yeah, you're absolutely correct. So it'd be
Uh,
actually be Virgo or something.
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'll just
Sorry, for
go.
some reason I thought it like regressed, but it actually moves forward.
Yeah.
Um,
No. It goes from Virgo to Leo, I believe. Yeah, it goes from Virgo to Leo
okay.
in
So
2020.
that one will hit his ascendant then.
Yeah. Yeah. Just
um,
like the one in 1995 when he had to sell the Plaza Hotel. He was at the depths of his whole, bankruptcy thing during that Mars retrograde of early 1995. The same Mars retrograde that I started studying astrology under, the Mars retrograde from Virgo to Leo. So that'll be the one in 2027. Look, just because I think he's going to win, it doesn't mean I think he's going to have, the
a
same
good
sort of.
time.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to have a good time. I mean, I think he's going to make sure other people don't have a good time either. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be, particularly happy or even like successful insofar as his agenda is concerned.
Yeah, I think he'll be given hell. There's, I sort of said this on Twitter a little while ago that like, yeah, if Trump wins, I fear Trump, but if Trump loses, I fear Trumpers.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean,
but
yeah. Either way, we know
like either way, this goes out. Like we're at the point where no election can actually make right what is now wrong. It too much has spilled. It's too yeah, it's just too volatile or fractured a situation to be kind of solved with another election, especially when the options are not particularly enthralling. But
Yeah.
in any case, um, so
So I do have some other political ones to talk about.
okay.
Let me just put these up here. Bear with me. Okay. And coming back to earlier when I was talking about the Venus-Saturn conjunction in Libra, the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980 was a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Libra with Pluto on Reagan's midheaven. Now, I'm no Reagan fan, but this really was, you don't need to be a Reagan fan to acknowledge that this was tremendously successful for him.
Well, this was the people giving their favor to an elderly man.
Right at
the time, he was the oldest.
Yeah, and I was alive at this time, and it really seemed like people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're electing someone this old for president." It was, amongst the other things,
Americans in 2024, hold my beer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Even in 2020, it was hold my beer. 2024 is hold my beer again. And if I'm not mistaken, even in 2016, Trump was just barely younger than Reagan, like a year or so younger than Reagan was at this point in 1980, right? Or even no, actually, I think he might have even been the same age. By the time Reagan was inaugurated, he was 70, but he was still 69 at this point. Whereas Trump was elected at 70. So actually, no, Trump was a little bit older than Reagan. Come to think of it.
So we have some kind suggestions being shared our way here in the comments. Someone said, "Is it an option to discuss Venus-Saturn conjunction through the houses?" Hashtag kind suggestion. And then B. Haven says, "Venus-Saturn through the signs seems like an interesting discussion." Well, we probably wouldn't be able to stop that at this point. We're almost at the end of our time here, so I don't know that we'll be able to go into as specificity as that.
Yeah, I think that the sort of the cookbook general thing, like to talk about it through the signs, is less satisfying to me, more abstract. I always want to see examples. That's just the way I like to do things.
What's tricky about that too is Saturn has been transiting through a given house in your chart since March of 2023. So some of these themes are going to be, well, at least one part of them are going to be already kind of ongoing through your life. Venus is just picking up on, this, whatever that sort of means in your chart. So, yeah, I mean, we would probably have to prepare that more to kind of do that sort of justice. But I think there's still a lot of value in looking at the way that these aspects show up. And as you may have noticed, like we paid a lot of attention to like Venus-Saturn recurrences. People with Venus-Saturn conjunctions are probably going to experience these Venus-Saturn conjunctions more personally than just say if it just happens to happen in a particular house of your chart. Yes, everyone will have it happen somewhere in their chart. But there will be certain people who might be hit by it more. So it's
what I will say about what comes up a lot in consultations these days is with regard to this conjunction. If you happen to be in a Capricorn perfection year, if you're in a Capricorn or an Aquarius perfection year, a Saturn ruled perfection year, then Venus coming to the Saturn is most likely favorable for you, because it's, like I said, I mean, Saturn doesn't mind at all having Venus come along and sweeten things up, so to speak. But if you're in a Taurus or as well, especially a Taurus perfection year, but even a Libra perfection year, despite all this sort of nice stuff going on here in Taurus, this interesting stuff, having Venus sort of come up to Saturn really means like, yeah, you've got someone's going to lay a turd in your punch bowl at the party. It's something is some kind of gravity or duty. Something is going to spoil the fun, so to speak, for the time being. Something needs to be taken care of, and sours and otherwise potentially lighthearted Venus transit through Pisces. I myself right now, I'm in a Pisces perfection year. So having Venus come into Pisces and join Saturn for me is kind of a relief, because I've been dealing with Saturn in my perfected sign all year. And apart from having the Wi-Fi go out on me and other things like that, I expect this Venus Saturn conjunction to just
yeah, keep going. I think you're back.
Okay. Well, speak of the devil, right? Yeah, being his perfection year, I expect the Venus-Saturn conjunction in Pisces to make things a little easier for me this week. And if you're in a Pisces perfection year, that's
yeah, I'd say with Venus and Saturn conjoining in your 8th house, I might think that could be coming into a kind of opportunity that comes with strings attached. Like money with strings attached, or money with conditions. Well, I guess we could say something similar. Venus was conjoining Saturn in the 2nd house. It would be like maybe having to put an upfront cost in exchange for some later benefit. Spending on something that's fairly expensive, as a kind of investment in something that will help you over time. That's how I would view like Venus-Saturn conjunctions in the 2nd and the 8th. I think another element to Venus-Saturn combinations is the idea of like relationships being maybe slightly more transactional, or with sort of strings attached, I guess you could say.
Yeah, come to think of it, going back to Trump and George Washington, in both their cases, their marriages are very transactional. Like even like George Washington, Martha I mean, he basically, marries her because she's got land, right? I guess it's a happy marriage, but there, even for him, his marriage was somewhat transactional.
Well,
Certainly,
and for
Trump's
Trump,
marriage,
Saturn rules the seventh too,
right?
in the 12th. And of course, Valens has all these delineations about Venus-Saturn and like adultery and like the long list of Trump's like sexual crimes, and allegations of sexual crimes. I
Right,
think also kind of makes sense in some ways for that transit. Not saying everyone, who has that necessarily is like Trump, but I am saying that there would be some way in which there's like some kind of overlap in some way.
right.
So we have some interesting questions here.
Okay.
Jennifer on YouTube asks, curious how these themes would change with a Venus-Saturn square or opposition.
Yeah. That's even if you have a natal Venus Saturn square or a Venus Saturn opposition, the conjunction still sort of triggers that natal relationship that you have in your chart.
like we saw with
Absolutely.
Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
so I would say the difference like between Venus-Saturn squares is obviously there's two different types of square, right? There's the square where Venus can either be in superior position or where Saturn could be in superior position. So I'd assume that if you have Venus in superior position to its square with Saturn, that it would be like your the benefits of those kind of transactional arrangements, would sort of would overcome the um uh, I guess the transactional element of those relationships. This would be like having a more transactional relationship where ultimately the fact that you like them, sort of is the more kind of important factor rather than the exchange maybe that's been set up. Whereas we might say the opposite for a Saturn Venus arrangement where Saturn is in the superior position to Venus. It's like, no, I don't really like you. It's what I need from you that matters more.
Right.
It's that sort of the more material or uh, need or the constraint is sort of what matters sort of more than just whether you like them or not. Venus Saturn oppositions um, are going to be kind of tugs of war, between these two impulses. So you may be someone who kind of operates on two modes. Maybe at some points you are more driven just by your appetites and desire and affections, but then other times, um, you know, feeling the need to withdraw from those kind of more sentimental kinds of connections. So, granted,
Yeah.
we're speaking like really big generalities here. Each one's different, and it's going to manifest differently across signs as well. Um, if there's like reception between Venus and Saturn in opposition. So, for example, if Venus was in Aquarius opposite Saturn in Leo, then um, Saturn is receiving Venus in its own sign. So there would be maybe a greater potential for kind of harmonizing that sort of opposition and making it sort of fruitful in some respect. Want to make sure I captured everything that we got a lot of comments here.
Okay. Are there?
Yeah, there's a bunch of
I
interesting
can't.
ones. Justin Trudeau, Saturn currently transiting through his seventh house. If you want to look at Justin Trudeau's chart, um,
Yeah, I can put them up. I've got some others that I can put up here. But yeah, we can look at Justin. So, what's the story with Justin? He's got.
is he a Virgo rising?
Is someone's,
Let's see.
let me see here.
The last thing I heard about him is that he made some comments about like maybe not wanting to be prime minister anymore or something. Yeah, he does have Virgo
Wow.
rising.
Yeah. Okay, but why is but he's got a Venus-Saturn trine, so I don't know why he's
Oh,
like, just because Venus-Saturn is happening in a
well,
7th
it was
house.
just, yeah, I
Okay.
mean, I think the person was just asking, just as maybe an example, um, of
Mm.
Justin Trudeau. Another person asked, where did they say it? Astro Brainfart said, okay, here's an example. Speculate how the Venus conjunct Saturn transit does in the 8th house of Cape Middleton. So I've heard about
Oh, yeah,
this.
that's an interesting example. So no one knows where she is, and there's rumors that, William has had an affair, and so she's, sort of, um yeah, withdrawn in protest. Now, we don't know what time she's born, so I don't know why someone's talking about what house she
Well,
has.
yeah, Astro Databank has a Rodden rating of C, 7 p.m. Let's see what the source
Oh, is
notes
that right?
are.
Okay.
Source notes are. Okay, Natalie Delahaye writes on
Okay, yeah, I know
4th
Natalie.
September 2017. In April 2011, I was commissioned by a friend of Prince William and Catherine Middleton to produce a compatibility chart as a wedding gift to the couple who were married on April 29, 2011 at Westminster Abbey, London. Because Catherine's time of birth has never been officially released and there is no record of the clock time on her birth certificate, I was very privileged to be given this information in circumstances that involved no intrusion or any breach of privacy or trust. Despite being under no contract of confidentiality, I made the decision to wait a few years before sharing it with the astrological world. Catherine Elizabeth Middleton was born at 7 p.m. on January 9th, 1982 in Berkshire, England.
Okay. Well, I've known Natalie online for a long time. She certainly is an astrologer and has been for a long time. So this is the chart that she's offering to us, and yeah, there's the Venus Saturn conjunction in Catherine's 8th house. The problem with doing the contemporary stuff is we don't know really what's going on, so we just wind up putting the chart up and speculating. It's
See.
not like doing Trump where everything's sort of up front and we know the story. This is the reason I like to use history, because we have the story. We know what's going on. Someday we'll know what's
She's
going on.
she's 42 years old. So
Yeah,
that's her 7th house perfection year. That's highlighting
where
Saturn.
she has it's ruled by Saturn and she has natal Venus retrograde in it.
Okay. And
So it's conceivable.
and
Yeah,
Venus
it's playing
actually,
out.
yeah, Venus does have like it's in a trine relationship by sign. That there's a mutual reception actually between Venus and Saturn. So
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting, I guess, that so we know like the topic that's kind of highlighted for this year is partnerships, where Mars is right now, and Pluto just entered. And this is interesting because the rumor is that there's been some sort of lapse in the marriage. Obviously, this is again kind of speculation, but the fact that it's 42, we also know 42 is a Uranus opposition. Um,
Mhm.
will be as of next year in like July, so it won't actually be until she's in her 8th house year. But
Yeah, it doesn't always
yeah,
happen exactly at
yeah,
42. It can vary.
it can vary. So we know she's potentially on the way towards a kind of major shake up in her life. But at least from where we are right now, the topic that is highlighted is the 7th house of relationships. That's ruled in a malefic way in her natal chart, even though it has some things to offset it. And Saturn is transiting currently through the 8th house, which is interesting because, again, this is all stuff that nobody's able to say for sure. We're dealing with this kind of
Yeah.
almost conspiracy theory level of speculation about her whereabouts. Although it's crazy because the photo that she put out actually was withdrawn by the AP because they said they found evidence that it had been doctored. And
Yeah.
so there is definitely something odd going on. I know that um, the other thing I'd heard before she sort of really went kind of missing was that she had gone to the hospital for an abdominal surgery. It wasn't specified
Right.
what that might have been. It could be anything. Could be fairly serious, I would think. Astro Brain Fart says rumor and speculation seems to say something about bowel issues. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I guess we could say that with Venus going through the eighth and meeting up with her Saturn as the ruler of the seventh, maybe maybe she will be. Maybe there are some negotiations going on to sort of pay her for her silence or something. Or
Oh, yeah,
well,
yeah. I mean, I think she's a little too deep into be in that situation. Look, I mean, in all honesty, the one thing I don't like doing is we don't know what's going on. We're using, we're the story is still unfolding, and it's not really what I like to do. I know people always want to talk about something just because it's a headline, but I'm more interested in learning astrology, and you do a better job by using historical examples. It's a little different if you're using Trump because it's like everything's out in the open.
mhm,
That there aren't that many secrets. I'm sure at some point we'll get the whole story on Kate Middleton, and then we can look back on this
right.
and look at it with clarity. But I don't think there's any real serious astrology learning we can do right now. We can just sort of play paparazzi and look at her chart and try to guess what's going on, but I don't find that terribly satisfying or productive.
I mean,
I hope I'm not being
point
a stick
taken.
in the mud here.
No, but the other reason I offered that more specific delineation was just because I had just been talking about Venus Saturn in the eighth or second houses, and we're
True,
also
yeah.
Leo
Well,
rising,
I
so
mean,
we have that aspect. So obviously, I can take on many different dimensions, but I would think at the very least with Venus moving towards her significator, like because the ascendant is actually perfected to Saturn, so I would think that this would mean better times ahead potentially for her. But yeah, I mean you're right. We don't necessarily have the ability to uh, intelligently comment
yeah,
on this.
no,
Obviously it's a bit different in the context of a client setting where we're working with them and talking directly with them and can inquire about what these things have sort of meant before.
sure.
But just I can understand your position. um
Yeah, I mean, this is why it is worth, maybe some people aren't interested in Kurt Cobain or Yoko Ono or Ronald Reagan or whatever, but when you know the story, when everything's said and done, and we know what we're looking at, I just feel it's more
Well, and
productive
then
to
that's
be.
how you can sometimes apply those sort of insights to, different situations because you have some idea of how they have worked out previously and what themes are present
Yeah,
there. But in any
yeah.
case, yeah, we can move on.
Okay, yeah, no, I have another example here keyed up. A pretty good one. I mean, it's a historical example, but it's a good one. Nikola Tesla, who had Venus Saturn co-present in Cancer, um, on this day during a Venus Saturn conjunction in the fourth, this construction he had built, Wardenclyffe Tower, which was supposed to deliver unlimited power to the world. Like the famous story, he builds it, I think for J.P. Morgan or someone like that. And Morgan says, well, where's the meter, so that we can charge people? And Tesla says, that's the great thing. There is no meter. It just, we can give everyone power for free. And it gets torn down. And this is 1917. Like, imagine, like, and this hasn't been reproduced. It's one of the great sort of tragedies of 20th century science, and it spells really kind of, I mean, not the end of Tesla. He still lives for a little while, but all the promise that he had, everything that he could have done for us, was culminating with this project, and it's just sort of foolishly destroyed because it's not profitable, even though it would have been immensely profitable in a non-monetary, but in terms of human progress and all the ecological problems we have now with generating energy, that this really was a huge opportunity lost. So I find this an interesting. This is another sort of bittersweet Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I mean, that also happened on the very day of a lunar eclipse that would have happened on his midheaven. I mean, I feel like
Yep.
that's sort
Yep.
of the more to me, that's like the more descriptive transit for the short and long term kind of meanings of this event. You know, when I think of Tesla and that Venus Saturn conjunction, I immediately think how he was a bit weird about women. Like, he was I know that he was like he like was deliberately like chaste, like he wanted to stay chaste his whole life.
Yeah.
He just
They think he's a not to diagnose him in the rear view mirror, but it's I think pretty commonly suspected he was autistic, and he just didn't have that. Yeah, he was just didn't relate to people on that level.
I just pulled up the Wikipedia section, and yeah, there's this huge section on relationships where it says that he once said in earlier years that he felt he could never be worthy enough for a woman, considering women superior in every way. But then he began to feel that women were trying to like outdo men and make themselves more dominant than men, and so he was very indignant about like women's progress and sort of had developing these kind of more like misogynist views. Um, and yeah, it was kind of a lifelong sort of bachelor.
How 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 dare they not stand on the pedestal he had placed them on?
Right. He thought that his chastity was helpful to his scientific ability. So the fact that he was kind of asocial, secluded himself from work, and I'm not, again, like you guys, you can see there are many different types of social maladies that can be associated with Venus Saturn. It's not all just one thing. But that's kind of I feel like that's the more compelling Venus Saturn point. I mean, the fact that this happened at a Venus Saturn conjunction is interesting. But I feel like the actual event
Well, I mean,
itself
think
is
about it.
more like eclipsy on his midheaven. Um,
I hear you on the eclipse, but I would say the Venus Saturn conjunction does say something about this event, because it's the end of a dream. There's something that's been built that's being destroyed. There's
Yeah, it's an
uh,
eclipse in his ninth on midheaven. But sorry, I don't mean to bust your balls, Nick. I think the thing is,
okay, okay.
but you
I
are correct. It is a recurrence transit, and he does have them roughly in the same neighborhood. So I mean, this would definitely
yeah.
have to be considered. And that's another thing that I'm sure you've noticed as well, Nick. That sometimes like things can happen at a recurrence transit that don't immediately avail themselves to some common way that we understand what those planets to mean. I mean, most of the times it's right on the money, but other times it seems like these kinds of recurrences are just sort of standing at attention or kind of a signature for someone. Um,
Mm.
there's certain ways someone just can be sort of more responsive to a particular cycle, where even if there isn't like a thematic through line that we can kind of understand from an astrological point of view, it is something that just does seem to be kind of more personally linked to who that person is. I mean, he's Taurus rising, Venus is his ruler of the ascendant. So, the fact that it's kind of coming back into contact with the Saturn, I mean, I imagine he probably wasn't feeling particularly social after, his life's work's been destroyed.
It's yeah. I mean, that's what it is. It's uh, the death of a dream, and one that he had sort of. I mean, he was on the verge of changing everything. So yeah, no, I see the Venus Saturn in
Mhm.
this. I absolutely see the Venus Saturn in this.
That's a really interesting um it's a really interesting example. I forget what else I was gonna say about this. I would imagine he'd have some sort of Venus. like I don't know how much work you've done with Tesla and like putting his life up
I've read a couple of
on
biographies. I have a file on him. Yeah.
because he was born at the what I assume was the red 5 of his era. The blue 5,
No, he's born in a blue
blue
3.
3.
He's a blue
Oh,
3.
okay. All right. Yeah, I can't do math. Um off the top of my head. Okay, so yeah, I figure if he's a blue 3, then there's probably other like blue 3 or red 3 events that sort of end up showing up for him, but we don't have to look at that. We don't have much time left, but is there any are there any comments we need to address? Okay, Vandana says it's a really good example, Nick. um
I think
yes,
so.
Elisa talks about Tesla's Venus being conjunct the South Node. That's a conflicted Venus. Yeah, I'd say so. From what we know about his perspective on relationships and women generally. Vandana also pointed out Saturn opposing Uranus. Was Saturn opposing Uranus at that time, or was it like a natal transit?
Let's go back to that. Whoops, where is it? There we are.
Oh, by sign, I suppose.
Yeah, by sign, but
Not very
really
close just yet.
Yeah, not in a way that I'd find remarkable.
Oh, Rhonda on YouTube asks, what orb should be used for being affected by this for a Venus-Saturn? I presume they mean for a Venus-Saturn conjunction.
Yeah, that's a good question. Orbs are a slippery fish. I mean, to some degree, as soon as two planets are co-present in a sign, there's some interaction between the two of them. And then, conversely, like we saw with George Washington's chart, if two planets are close, like within 3 degrees of orb, but they're in different signs, there's still an element of them being conjunct. Absolutely. So, ultimately, the tight conjunction itself is just sort of the middle of the eye of the storm of a given transit. It's always in effect while they're co-present in a sign, and certainly when they're close zodiacally, regardless if they're in the same sign or not, that also counts. So I deliberately keep it loose like that because you do see it operating even under that looser parameter.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I tend to have an orb, at least for everything else outside of the moon. I can sometimes use up to like a 7-degree orb. The way I kind of came to that is that, like, if the sextile is the smallest aspect outside of the conjunction, which depending on the way you look at it is either 0 degrees or 360 degrees, then and that's like the the sixth harmonic, then the inverse of that would be like the 60th harmonic would be a 6-degree separation. So kind of the inverse of the smallest aspect would mean like a 6-degree orb, and then I just tack on an extra one just to make sure. But I don't but I view transits the same way that you do, Nick. I think there's something that happens when planets are in the same sign, regardless of how far apart they are, and also something that happens when they are just geometrically, within a certain distance, even if it's across the signs. And I think the difference is basically when two planets are co-present in a sign, even if they're not in a conjunction, I think they contribute to kind of like the atmosphere. Like if you think of it in terms of weather, maybe you have like Mars and Saturn enter a sign, or Mars and Uranus enter the same sign, then it's like you might imagine like there'll be like rain clouds, which would suggest the possibility of like a lightning strike, but it's not when the lightning strikes. But as Mars and Uranus get closer, maybe that's the moment that the a lightning strike comes and strikes a building. But then as that aspect sort of departs or dissipates, there's still clouds. There's still like this potential for a lightning strike, which would be like the most dynamic or active part of a storm. So it's only sort of exists as sort of a possibility, when they're co-present, as opposed to actually, standing under a lightning cloud with an umbrella, waiting to get struck, as Mars and Uranus are close together. I hope that makes sense. I wish I had a better way of explaining that.
No, I hear you. Let's see. I'm looking through all my different examples here to find the perfect one to close with. I see a few here, but bear with me while I'm looking through.
Jennifer has a good question, which you definitely can answer. Jennifer asks, just to clarify, if there is a Venus-Saturn aspect natally, it will be triggered when that aspect arises again, irrespective of sign or degrees of orb to any natal planet.
Yes.
There's called recurrence transits. It's definitely it's something that does exist, that you do see occasionally referenced in like traditional texts, but it's otherwise been fairly ignored. And so we don't look at transits that don't make an aspect to other planets. But Nick's work I feel is definitely the strongest contemporary body of work that shows that this is a thing.
Yeah, we've shown a few examples like that tonight.
Yeah.
Today, rather. It's tonight for me, today for the rest of you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. No. I've just been looking through different examples. I don't know which one I would want to close with. What other questions do we have?
Actually, Vandana says divorces are represented by Mars more than Saturn, you think? I'm assessing Bill Gates' chart. Bill Gates also has a Venus-Saturn conjunction. I don't know if we have Venus-Saturn events for him.
What do I have here? Well, let's see. Well, you know what? Why don't I share my screen and we do this in real time together, and we'll either have something or we won't, but folks can see how I do what I do. So I have my database here, and I go to my Bill Gates file. And there are a fair amount of charts here, and so I do a chart search for Venus-Saturn conjunctions. I'm using a 5-degree orb here just to find enough examples. Okay, and that's the only one that comes up. What if I use a wider orb? Because only his natal chart came up. This is a 20-degree orb. Okay, so let's see what happens here if I open these. This is how we make the sausage, folks. Enter a bunch of charts into a file, and then just see
what shows.
Okay, so microchip. Yeah. Okay, so that's his Venus-Saturn conjunction. You can see Windows 1.00 is shipped to retail in November of 1985. And no, it's not a Venus-Saturn conjunction. It's approaching. It's within that, again, I had to look for a 20-degree orb to find anything. Although it is all pretty close to the natal Venus-Saturn. And actually, for those of you who enjoy midpoints, this Venus-Saturn conjunction is probably somewhat close to the midpoint of that approaching Venus-Saturn conjunction. What else do we have here?
This is also in the aftermath of his Saturn return, right? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I jumped ahead 13 years later when Windows 98 is delayed to deflect some lawsuits, and you can see Venus is approaching a conjunction to Saturn there. So those are wide, but yeah, he does have the natal Venus-Saturn conjunction.
One thing we should definitely remind people is the valence delineation of Venus conjunct Saturn, I think, included that.
What, having to delay the release of Windows because of
yeah, exactly. let me get to it.
Valens totally was ahead of his time
Yeah.
talking about the Windows versus Apple, uh,
Oh, he said
computer
no. He says
wars.
Saturn and Venus cause them to fall into harm and lawsuits, which is interesting when we think about the fact that one of the largest,
Oh,
lawsuits ever was, against Microsoft, being accused of being a monopoly. That was
right, which is what we were looking at
right.
just there. So when the release was delayed, oh, okay, so we hit on something there for sure, for sure. And of course, someone else we were looking at earlier is in the middle of a few legal tangles right now. Owes a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
Lawsuits. So I wonder,
Right.
yeah, I mean that's an ongoing saga, but it will be
Jeff
interesting to see
Bezos
how this
also has
goes.
Saturn conjunct Venus, right? And okay,
Okay.
dang.
Okay, I don't think I have much on Jeff Bezos yet. There's only so many billionaires I can stomach, but here, let's put them up here. Okay, so we don't have a birth time for him. I'll take the angles out so they don't confuse people. Yeah, he does have a Venus-Saturn conjunction. Interesting. Okay, well spotted. Thanks for that. Who pointed that out?
That was someone in the comments.
I can't access the comments tonight for some reason, so
Oh no, really?
Yeah. It just comes up blank for me.
It
I think
was
because I had a Wi-Fi issue earlier.
I believe it's Vandana. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Vandana's always helpful that way. Consistently helpful. Thank you, Vandana.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a buy will with Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and indeed they both have Venus-Saturn conjunctions. I think that Bill Gates. It'd be interesting to see that. I think we're still waiting for more information to come out of the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing. And we
Yeah.
know Bill Gates is part of that whole
And
issue.
that
It'd be interesting to see if this coming week with the conjunction tells us anything about the Jeffrey Epstein situation.
right. It's also in his fifth house, for what that's worth.
Right, and it's like his wife has left him, and it's pretty widely believed that that's because because of some kind of Epstein. Well, here we are again speculating, just like Kate Middleton. See, I'm a hypocrite. I go and do it myself. Epstein, Epstein's not alive, but look at where he's got Venus.
Oh, right, in Pisces with Mars. Yeah, that's yeah, I mean, this was
So
what we
yeah,
talked about when we looked at the Venus-Mars conjunctions, how so many people
right.
who've been implicated in this have Venus conjunct Mars, but it's interesting that we also have Trump and Gates who have Venus conjunct Saturn. So it's like Venus
Right.
aligning with the malefics when they are involved in things pertaining to sexuality, but things which are potentially criminal.
There was
Jeff
the
Bezos also
revelation.
um
Right.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to point out what's his name, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Um, because we had this thing come out this past week. Where is he now? Oh God. Okay. Do I have to go to my Kennedy file? That's the other. I'm operating without my reading glasses because I left them in the other room when my Wi-Fi went out. I'm kind of all over the place here. Where is he? Here he is, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. just this past week, someone asked RFK Jr. about Jeffrey Epstein, and he said, oh, I know all these guys. I knew, Harvey Weinstein, and it was a real cell phone, that response he had. I think I'm losing it here. Are we running out of steam?
No, I was just checking out some stuff on Bezos. We know that, one of Valence's interpretations of Venus conjunct Saturn is that it could also make sense for people who deal with adultery. So obviously that makes sense for a few of these cases, but also for Jeff Bezos, who famously left his wife Mackenzie Scott for this other woman. So it's just trying to get some information on when they met, and I get the impression they met at a party that was held for the release of Manchester by the Sea, which came out in November 2016. And so we don't know when this party was held to sort of celebrate the release of this, but we know that November 2016 period was, in the aftermath of a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Sagittarius.
Right.
While we don't know the exact timing on that, I have my suspicions based on Venus Saturn conjunctions. But so I always worry if I come off like too sort of negative in some of my delineations of Venus conjunct Saturn, but I kind of went with what the data sort of shows us, as well as kind of what has been known about this combination, for the longest amount of time. And that's kind of what seems to show up. But I guess we could have done better to try to find more sort of positive examples. But as you can see, it's kind of bittersweet. It's malefic and a benefic.
Yeah, it's not the most sort of cheerful subject, is it? I mean, when I'm looking at the examples I have that I haven't brought up, I mean, they're all super depressing. Maybe I just do a rapid fire look through them before we end this. Things like, you ever hear of the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire, where there was this sort of sweatshop in New York City where all these women were working in a shirt factory, and it caught fire, and a lot of them had to like leap to their deaths, and it was this huge scandal that wound up. It did wind up revolutionizing, working conditions and subjects like that, but at the expense of all these poor women who were trapped in this fire and perished. So that's a Venus Saturn with the North Node in Taurus, and it was a huge story at the time in 1911. There's also the Sykes-Picot. This is something that happened over a century ago, but we're totally dealing with it now. Excuse me, I'll just take the angles off for this chart. Venus is approaching Saturn here in 1916 when France and Great Britain agree to sort of, once they defeat the Ottoman Empire, they're going to partition the Middle East between them. And, what could go wrong from there? Surely there's nothing happening in 2024 that's some kind of aftershock of this particular agreement.
No, of course not.
He said sarcastically. And speaking of the Middle East, a year later, Lawrence of Arabia leads this battle. He convinces Arabs that if they fight for Britain against the, to be freed from the Ottoman Empire, that they'll eventually have, they'll be able to, have political freedom, and so, yeah, he basically uses them, manipulates them to fight against the Ottomans on the side of the British during this Venus Saturn with Neptune. So it's a big lie, So that's interesting relative to Sykes-Picot, and maybe put them up on a bi-wheel here. How these two Venus Saturn conjunctions Europe. You with what's going on? Is my wife?
Yeah, it's going in and out.
Oh, okay.
It
Co-agreement
looks
of
like you're there now.
Am I here? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear
Yeah.
me? Yeah. Okay. I can't tell if
Yes, I can.
you say anything. Okay.
Oh,
Just
yeah. Sorry.
okay. I'll just go back here. The Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916 on the Middle East, Lawrence of Arabia's Battle of Aqaba, the siege in 1917, both of these being really key events in what leads up to what we're still dealing with in the Middle East today. Everything that's going wrong in the Middle East as we speak.
Right. One other, I guess, sort of final thing I would want to share is some of the other delineations that Valence has around like Venus-Saturn aspects have to do with like being with someone who is like what he calls sterile, or like unions that don't like produce like children, basically. Which is interesting because when I was doing some research, just sort of casually looking at like different news events that have happened at different Venus Saturn conjunctions, I came to this one, which was kind of interesting. Um, so this was reported back on November 12th,
Oh
2014.
wow!
So 11 women died and 62 more were hospitalized after being paid to be sterilized at this sterilization clinic. And so if we look, I mean, this is just on the day that this was announced, but you can see Venus was conjunct Saturn on that day. Apparently, some of these deaths had happened like in like the previous week, so that would have been when Venus was continuing to sort of work its way towards Saturn, and we can obviously tell that the more dramatic nature of this might just have to do with this is like during a blue 4 as well. You know, this is like
It's a
a
Bluetooth.
kind of, it's not just a regular Venus. You're right. It is a blue 2. Um, I will one day get it right.
You
Yes, you're
generally
right.
do.
So,
We've both had brain farts tonight.
you know, you could also probably link this to Mars Pluto, you know, in terms of like a
No, I think
mass
you're spot on
alignment
with
type thing.
Venus Saturn.
But yeah, I thought that was a very interesting Venus Saturn kind of event, given that it pertains directly to women's issues as well as this sort of connection between Venus and Saturn and this topic of like things surrounding fertility or what have you.
Right. And it totally, like the thing I was showing a minute ago, the famous triangle fire, shirtwaist fire. This was another tragic event that had to do with women working in unsafe conditions, and that led to deaths. And
Mm,
you see that going on there too. So
wow.
yeah, I mean they're different. One has to do with working conditions. One has to do with sterilization. But either way, yeah, you have women dying needlessly because of carelessness and heartless circumstances.
Right. That's interesting too, because it's like Taurus, which is like the sign of like material things or
Yeah,
textiles or manufacturing versus
right.
Scorpio, you know, which
Which is,
you know,
yeah,
is
good point.
bloody
Yeah,
and, you know, gory. So uh yeah, I guess in Pisces then, I guess it's interesting because Venus has a lot of power in Pisces, like Venus is exalted in Pisces. So I would think that it would probably center then on like a very privileged class of women in some respect. Like
mm.
um this could just be by wealth or perhaps like by just popularity or looks,
Well,
models, somehow coming under sort of scrutiny or due to unfortunate things that have happening to sort of beloved or highly desired woman or something like that. Um,
well, I know
or
I was poo-pooing the utility of looking at Kate Middleton, but it certainly sounds like you're
A
describing
princess.
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
so,
Oh, weird.
maybe I walk that back enough to say we could find out, I mean, my problem was we were speculating on what we don't know, but given that the conjunction is coming up, maybe the conjunction is around the time that we do find out what's going on with Kate Middleton, and maybe it really is something more sinister or sadder than we even know at this point.
Right.
Maybe
Now,
the revelation is even more brutal.
and I know, like, I focused a lot on Venus as women, and I just want to make sure that people know, like, I typically don't, I'm not typically not so gendered in my approach to planets. I just think that in this particular case, it sort of happens to make sense. I think for men, I think that Venus Saturn aspect is probably going to highlight the um, well, their shortcomings or the bad things that they do, to women. I think it's these things kind of have there's two different sides, that sometimes comes out in these sort of context dependent ways of you know
Yeah,
social.
we did look at a number of men tonight.
Yeah.
In generally, in the general signification, Venus does signify. There is some level of gendering when it comes to Venus and Mars. Not in that silly book sense, and not in a cartoonish sense, but broadly speaking, I think if you eschew that entirely, then you are missing out on some level. That being said, certainly, Mars can be very powerful in the
For
charts and
women.
lives of women, and
Right.
Venus can be very powerful in the charts and lives of men.
Of course.
But in the abstract, it's not, it's not misguided.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to make sure that, I don't know, I just was sort of anticipating maybe a potential criticism of being too kind of gender focused or gender essentialist about the planet. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood that. It looks like
yeah,
the astrology podcast showed up at the very end saying, boom, that's it. That when we were talking about Venus and Pisces as it may relate to describing, well, Kate Middleton.
okay.
Alrighty. Who are you, Nick? um,
I'm Patrick Watson, and you can find me at Patrick Watson Astrologer. No, sorry, Patrick Watson Astrology.com.
yeah.
And I'm really awesome, and you should go to my website and book me. And who are you? And who are
and
you?
I'm Nick Dagan Best, and I'm pretty cool, I guess. And you can find me and my work and book me for all kinds of services, all of your electional or rectification or natal needs at my website, Nick Dagan Best Astrology. No, Nick Dagan Best Astrologer.com. Pardon me. I can't introduce you as me. This you gotta
I know. I'm just
reclaim
trying
our
to mix it
identities
up.
here.
I'm just trying to mix it up and have a good
Succeeded.
time with that. All right. Well, this has been good fun. We certainly covered a lot of ground, and thank you as always, Patrick. It's been glorious. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. I hope you learned something, and yeah, coming back next week, I will have a proper camera and microphone set up, and we'll be back to a sort of a smoother production value. So I look forward to that myself. Yeah, I'm still juggling a lot here with relocating back to South Africa.
I also want to let everyone know that we'll be doing our watch party on Patreon next
Right?
Saturday. So I'm going to put out a poll on our Patreon. If you go to our Patreon, just search, pardon me, the Astrology Livestream on Patreon, you'll find us. And we'll put out a poll for our Cosmic and Lunar tier members. Or no, actually just before our Cosmic members.
Just Cosmic.
So
Yeah.
just Cosmic tier, they'll be able to vote on a film that we all watch together over live chat on Amazon Prime Video on Saturday, and then after the movie, we get together on Zoom and talk about the astrology of the movie. And it's a lot of fun. If you don't have anything to do, if you don't have any friends like me, in person, you can you can join us with some fellow astro nerds and you know, have plans for that night. So definitely consider supporting us on Patreon, and you know, you get a chance to vote on the movie and watch it with us and talk.
Yeah, it's always good fun. We choose films typically that you know, of course, that we can get into the astrology of, either because the plot of the movie covers some real event in history that we can get into the astrology, or sometimes, you know, the first movie we did was A Fish Called Wanda, where we wound up looking at the charts of the actors involved and the production and the transits they were having. So one way or the other, it's always, not only we're not just watching a movie, it's always about the astrology. So yeah, it's great fun, and do sign up if you're not already a member of the Cosmic tier for the Astrology Livestream at Patreon. Do sign up, and then you get to have a voice and a choice in what movies we watch and cover.
That was a snappy slogan, voice and a
Yeah,
choice.
I'm finally snappy at the very end of the show. How about that?
Well,
It
it's
took
a
me
different time zone now.
20 minutes to get snappy.
All right, awesome. Well, happy St. Patrick's Day out there for everyone who
Yeah,
celebrates.
happy.
Drink
I know I
responsibly.
hog it all. Isn't Saint Nick's Day? I mean, I get Christmas or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not big on the saints. I don't know. But yeah, happy St. Patrick's to you. I'm gonna go get drunk. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to bed. All right, everyone. Thank you, and we'll see you at the watch party. And if you're not a patron, we'll see you next Sunday.
See you then. Bye.
Bye.